Gambit lovers, it is so rare these days to see at the top level of chess gambits and dubious gambits being played, but that is exactly what happened in the US Chess Championships today, where my friend Grandmaster Awonder, as you see here in the top left, played the Kholmov Gambit in the Petroff against Fabiano Caruana, who is leading the tournament by a clean point, who is leading the US Chess Championships by a clean point. Fabiano Caruana, of course, one of the best players in the world. No wonder whips out the Damiano Gambit, or the Kholmov Gambit. And well, let's waste no time. Let's get right to the game. It was e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. So this is the Petroff. Awonder is playing with the black pieces. And after knight takes e5, so okay. You have a lot of options when if you're black here and you're facing the Petroff. You of course have the main line with d6 to be able to take this pawn, and you have the Stafford Gambit, but of course the Stafford can't be played at the top level. But now you have one more interesting option that apparently clearly can be played at the top level, because Awonder drew this game, but just playing knight takes e4. And we know knight takes e4 as the Damiano variation, but it's probably more known as just like a beginner trap, where white here plays queen to e2, this knight is attacked, you can try defending it with d5, but the knight gets attacked one more time, and then once it retreats, white here has a move to just win the game, which is knight to c6, check. It's like an example that you show people just starting out in chess as an example of a discovered attack here, because the queen is hit, and of course the queen will be captured either here or here. Okay, but Awonder gets away with playing knight takes e4 in the game, and Fabiano of course plays queen to e2, but Awonder plays queen to e7, and so loses this knight, but then plays d6. So now the knight is under attack, and of course it cannot move because the queen will hang. And there's really no way to save the knight. Bishop to b5 is check, but it will just delay the inevitable, where white will be losing one of these pieces. And okay, Fabiano plays d4 and takes. So this is all very standard stuff you see in the database here. Now white has their first decision, because white is presumably going up a pawn. They will play either d takes e5 or queen takes e5. And in the game we saw d takes e5, but I want to give first, a comprehensive overview of all the cool tricks and traps in the Kholmov Gambit. So maybe you guys might consider playing it, because it's clearly valid, it's playable at the top level. So I will get to the game at the end, but I'm very, very excited to share with you all these lines. In the game, Fabiano played d takes e5, and we will get to that. But what if queen takes e5? What if queen takes e5 and white trades away their queen here? It seems like maybe that's the one downside, that white brought their queen out early in the game. And so here, their positions are almost exactly the same, except white, they are exactly the same actually, except white just has this pawn on the board. Okay, so what is the point? So the most common move for black is actually bishop to f5, just targeting the c2 pawn, but black actually has bigger fish to fry. And the best move is knight to c6. And so this launches some important decisions for white, because this pawn is attacked, and so what do you want to do about it? And you see the moves here, f4, bishop to f4, bishop to b5. We're going to cover all of them, but we're also going to cover what I think is actually the best move, or I will definitely cover what I think is the best line. And it's actually not what Fabiano Caruana played, but this other move, knight to c3 here, which is very counterintuitive. You see, okay, it comprises 2% of games, because, okay, these other three moves actually defend the pawn. So f4, the most common one, seems most solid, because you play bishop f4, okay, maybe this pawn gets attacked one more time and you lose it, or the bishop gets attacked. You'll definitely see cool tricks like that later in this video. But pawn to f4, so it seems, okay, got a really solid grip on that pawn. What could possibly go wrong? Well, after bishop to f5, this pawn is hit, and now how do you want to defend it? If you're white and you're smart, you'll bail out into an equal position by playing bishop to b5, letting that pawn go and just being able to castle your king. But at this point, you're probably facing a greedy player, and they'll probably play c3 or bishop to d3 to save this pawn, and in both cases, white is in trouble. So if pawn to c3, black simply castles long, and black has a lot of piece activity in exchange for just being one pawn down, and bishop to c5 is coming as well, and rook to each. So bishop e3, bishop to b5 are the most common moves. So if bishop b5, then just bishop c5. And here, the position is just excellent. The position is just excellent for black. Rook to e8 is coming, and then like g5 or f6 is coming, undermining these pawns. Pressure against this king. This king cannot castle because of this bishop in the way. So just because there's queens off the board does not mean white is home free at all, because these rooks are just going to be killing down these files with f6 and g5. So that's not a good option. Bishop to e3 is the most common move to defend against this. But then black has this excellent strike, g5. g5. So if you take this, then there's knight takes e5, and again, all sorts of issues down these files. So most people are trying to hold their structure with g3. And so what was the point of getting rid of these g-pawns for black is bishop to h6. this very clever move, bishop to h6, taking advantage of the fact that this is unprotected. So if you just do nothing or ignore this issue, that bishop can hang. So black gets their pawn back and still has an excellent position. So we're continuing to follow like all the most common moves here. King to f2 defends the bishop. However, here black launches starts an excellent maneuver, knight e7, where the knight's coming to d5 or g6, picking up that pawn, and black is really just killing in this position. This evaluation will only go up the more it thinks about it. So white tried to hang on to all their pawns and it didn't work out for them. They had this other option instead of c3 to play this move bishop to d3 to hang on to this pawn. But it's not a very good one because after takes knight b4, white has a couple issues. Not only that is that pawn hanging, but there's knight c2, which is going to win the rook. So like even if you castle, knight c2 will trap and win the rook. So a lot of people here are playing king d2. It's pretty greedy, trying to hold on to c2 and d3. But of course, after just castles, this pawn's hanging. Knight c3, and even better than just knight takes d3, which really lets them off the hook. This pawn's not going anywhere. Is this move like f6? So after takes, there's rook g8, there's bishop h6. All these pieces are coming into the game, target, and whereas white's has just no development again, and so this position's very bad for them when they try to go greedy. It certainly does not work out. So f4 is not a good move. All right, what is a good move? What about bishop to f4? Is bishop to f4 any better? Same idea, bishop f5, just striking c2. So basically, I mean, black's idea is pretty clear. Knight c6 hits this pawn, bishop f5 hits this pawn, then we're going to castle our king, and white's going to deal with it. White's going to have to find some way to deal with it. So if white goes with bishop d3 again, they have the same issue of takes, and knight b4, trying to deal with this, king d2, these issues, but again, castle's long, and big problems for white trying to defend d3, and they're certainly not going to stay up a pawn. So not a good line. Pawn c3 is an option as well, but will lead to some kind of similar lines. In fact, after castles here, now this e-file is a big issue. So like knight takes e5 is, I think, already a threat. After takes, just rook to e8. For example, something like this. I think rook, knight takes e5, takes, rook to e8. Now if you defend your bishop, then f6. So this is a very nice way for black to get their pawn back. And if bishop to b5, looks like a very good move, actually, because it controls the e8 square. So if you take, it looks like, okay, you just lost a piece. However, there's this nice trick rook d5, and actually black is still doing very well. A massive development advantage, and white's no longer a pawn. So these are all the most common moves. I'm trying for white here. I'm trying. Okay, what if bishop to b5? Bishop to b5 is a pretty nice way to deal with this pawn. It pins over here, so we'll simply break that pin. Now threatening knight takes e5. And you'll note, so like if you defend the pawn like this, you'll note there's all sorts of tricks with knight takes e5 in these lines. So the point is if you take here, black recoup their pawn. And if you take here, black still recoup their pawn by playing knight takes d7 because this bishop was unprotected. So bishop to d7 makes that sort of threat. So presumably white takes that knight. So now finally they don't have to deal with this pawn, but they have to deal with this pawn. So now castles. Castle's long for black. Knight to c3, let's say. And just bishop out. And here, this is a very nice position for black. And you can see the engine loves it because it loves this bishop pair. These bishops are fantastic. These rooks are fantastic, hitting this pawn. White's tied down to everything. Like, for example, bishop comes out somewhere, and rook d4, rook's coming here, gonna take this, gonna take stuff here. This rook's coming to e8, gonna take stuff here, or rook g4. Everything's a target, and it's just super fun for black. Like what a fantastic gambit! What a fantastic gambit! So that's all lines with into the endgame. Actually, other than this move, knight to c3, and knight to c3. So remember this idea. Actually, knight takes e5 is a bad move. Or it's like a very minor inaccuracy because knight b5 and dealing with c7 is annoying. We'll get back to this. But black can dodge this with the nice move bishop f5, tempoing c2, and so this is still hanging, and black will castle long, and black will continue to have fun instead of going after pawns at the moment. It's very important to develop quickly and castle quickly right now, as you guys have been seeing in these lines. So that's why Fabiano in the game did not play this queen takes e5 line. It's playable, but black seems to have more fun in that endgame. So pawn takes e5 in the game, and now knight c6. And now again, white has options to defend the e5 pawn. So bishop to b5, f4, bishop to f4, knight c3. Seems pretty familiar, regardless of whether these queens are on the board. So you got to deal with the e5 pawn. So pawn to f4 is not the best option, but it's very solid defending e5, but that's not at the top of their worries. So bishop to g4 is a very nice spot for the bishop now. It's not hanging anymore. And another thing that makes it very nice, so bishop to b5 is the most common move, and it looks like, okay, that's a serious threat, right? Takes, and queen takes, check. And here is hanging. This bishop, what are you doing over here? You should be on d7, but black can just play castles long. And now if white takes this knight, there's rook to d1 check. Look at that. It's not every day you see just rook to d1 check. Here, just rook takes h1. I think white, it looks like maybe white gets something because bishop takes b7 looks exciting, but white is not getting nearly enough here, about -4. So not a good situation for white. So they have to guard against rook d1. And another common move is castles. However, castles loses to queen c5 check. Because you played f4, you weaken your king a little bit, queen c5 check, and simply take the bishop. So that doesn't work. What can you play? You can play knight c3, but here black has a very good move, knight d4. So knight d4 puts a little pressure on the bishop, but moreover, threatens to play bishop to f5 and just take c2. So for example, castles, bishop to f5 is defended like this, so the queen should move, and now knight takes c2 with a4. There's really no better spot for the queen to move. The only other square was here and here, both of which get forked, right? So not fun for them there. So bishop to d3 can defend, but this position is a like completely lost. So queen to h4 and bishop f5, I think both end the game. Bishop f5. So queen's got to go here. Takes. If c takes d3, there's knight c2 check, winning the queen. So if queen takes d3, there's no killer discovery at the moment, although maybe knight b3 hits the queen and hits the rook like this. Oh no, don't do that. Queen f5 check, and then you lose your knight. Be careful, be careful. But I think the best move here, yeah, queen h4 check. Queen h4 check, so now if pawn g3, simply queen to h3 or h5. Queen h3, and this is completely losing. The queen's coming into g2, knight to f3 check is coming. This is falling, and a complete disaster of a position for white. So lots and lots of cool tricks and traps here. So pawn to f4, again, makes them vulnerable, leaves their king in the center too long, and black is castling and developing really, really quickly, and is going to strike at this king really quick before white has an opportunity to develop, because white's getting greedy. You know, they really try to hold on to that pawn. Okay, so bishop to f4. Speaking of greedy, bishop to f4, this is one of the nicer traps in the line. Hit him with g5. And now g5 is an idea you'll see a lot. With the queens on the board and the queen there to defend g5, every time there's bishop to f4, g5 will be on the table. And the point is, okay, g5, no big deal. I play bishop g3, I may retain the defense. Oops, you lose. f5, brilliant move. If en passant, you guys like the rule, you always have to do en passant. Well, okay, you lose your queen here. Nobody's defending the queen. And then if you move your queen, then just f4 is going to win the bishop. You can see this is already like -4. It's even better than just a piece. f4 because black's going to castle. All of black's pieces are good. But f5 and f4 trapping this bishop. Check, no matter. Just like queen f7. You don't have to move your king. Take the bishop. Castle very quickly. All black's pieces are nice. And f5, f4 to pick up the bishop. What a nasty, nasty trick. So bishop f4 is no good for that reason. Okay. And now here, we're down to the two best options for white. There's bishop to b5, and there's knight to c3. One of these Fabiano Caruana played in the game, and one of them I think is the best move after analyzing it more. So what I think is the best move is knight to c3. So after knight to c3, the point is we're not doing anything that caused all these issues of defending this pawn. But knight to c3 is actually an aggressive move because our target is c7. So we're going to play like knight d5 or knight b5 and hit c7. So here, black pretty much has to play queen takes e5. And the point is, you'll note that this transposes into something else I was discussing before. Remember when this was a pawn in the queen takes e5 line? When this was a pawn, I said to play bishop f5. In the other line, and not to transpose into this position, because this position I think white has some pretty dynamic play with this move knight to b5, hitting c7, and there's no easy defense for c7. There's no easy defense. I mean, black has to play this. Black has to recoup their pawn here. There's really nothing else great that this bishop can do. You know, if you just develop, then okay, knight d5 is a big problem. Hits the c7 pawn. So it has to recoup this pawn, and after knight to b5. Now you have to deal with c7, and this is something that people forget about often in chess. I mean, f7, f2 we talk about all the time, but the c7 weakness or the c2 weakness, when queen goes away or queen gets traded, can be really annoying. And this is a great example of it because the bishop's still there. You can't like castle or play rook c8 to deal with it. So how do you deal with it? If you play bishop to d6, well, this is obviously, you know, very bad for black. They have a weakness here and give up the bishop pair. So black's best move is bishop to b4 check. And if just c3, then bishop a5, and I think black's probably okay. Bishop to f4, I think f6, so that they don't lose this pawn. But bishop to d2, so we trade here. And again, black still has to deal with this c7 pawn, and the best move is just king d8. And then after this rook comes into the game, I mean, it's a game, but I think white has a nice advantage in the game here. And I think this is probably the line I'd recommend most, also because it's very tricky. That's probably one of the main reasons I'd recommend it. Obviously, I understand why Fabiano didn't want to play it. Awonder wasn't going to get tricked, of course. But knight c3, going after with ideas to go after this pawn is how I would recommend you to play it as white. Flip the script on them. Let this pawn hang, and you be the aggressor. Stop defending pawns too much. Okay, in the game, bishop to d by Fabiano. Bishop to b5 and bishop to d7. And in the game, Fabiano played knight to c3. So the reason is because if you play bishop to f4, you guessed it, the idea after bishop f4 is g5, and bishop g3, do you guys remember the move? It is f5. With the queen hanging, so there's no pawn takes f6, you lose your queen, and you would lose to f4 if you move your queen, you would lose that bishop. So not bishop f4. There's another move here, it's the most common move, it's castle short. Black should not take on e5 too early because their king's still in the center. Oh, also, like, this b7 pawn is hanging right now, but their king's still in the center, and so they might get toasted on this e-file if they open it up. So castles... And here, so there's a couple moves for white. If bishop to f4, again, not much different. g5, there's a good move for white e6, but it's like impossible to find. 6 out of 611 people have found it. But g5, f5, g5, f5, and f4. So we'll be getting to that Fabiano game very quickly. But so rook to e1 allows this trick of knight takes e5, which is a very nice one. So basically the point is that there's actually rook to d1 checkmate in a lot of lines. So for example, if you trade everything here, and rook takes b5 is impossible because of checkmate here. So black is able to recoup their pawn simply by capturing on e5. If takes over here, just rook takes d7. And if you take everything on e5, then rook to d1 is going to be checkmate again. So there's no issues getting the pawn back like that. Otherwise, there's this move knight to c3, and still knight takes e5. Because takes and just knight takes d7, and here black is doing completely solid. So hard for white to hang on to the pawn here. Bishop to f4 gets hit with g5 and f5, and pawn to f4 gets hit with like queen c5 check to win the bishop. So not castles, and not bishop to f4 because it gets hit with g5s, but Fabiano knew this idea, so played knight c3 very smartly, and Awonder had no interest in transposing to this, or actually queen takes e5 is going to lose a piece. So bishop takes c6. The point is if you recapture, then you lose your queen. There is a knight defending the queen. And if you take here, you'll lose a piece. That bishop saves itself by recapturing the queen. White's a piece ahead. If you play knight takes e5, then I think this pawn's hanging in all lines or something like this. Takes. Or maybe not. But Awonder didn't want to play this. And I think correctly played castles long. That pawn's not going anywhere. And in the game here, bishop to f4 was played. So bishop to f4, defending this, and it's much more smart to play it now, because g5, bishop to g3, f5, it's not the same. Pawn takes f6, completely playable. He waited until the knight was on c3 to defend the queen on e4. So that brings us to the game with queen to b4. And so actually, I'm now going to pull up this game. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces in round 9 of the US Chess Championships against Awonder-Liang with the black pieces with the Kholmov Gambit. Here we go. So it's the Petroff. Fabiano, the king of the Petroff, the king of Petroff theory, but he got a little out-prepared in this game. He got a bit out-prepared. Or it appears he got a bit out-prepared anyway. So, okay, let's talk about this. So in this position after bishop to f4, so there's no g5, f5 ideas because en passant is possible because this queen is defended. So Awonder plays this very nice move, queen to b4. So queen to b4 threatens to trade queens a bit differently, but also notably, so if takes, then bishop takes b4, and that just helps Awonder develop. Of course, rook to e8 now comes, and this pawn is probably toast. So for that reason, and because b2 is also hit, Fabiano plays the natural castles long, defending b2. But the point is, after Awonder trades, he distracts the knight from the defense of this bishop and is able to play knight takes e5. So now if bishop takes e5, this is hanging, there's nothing defending there, and Awonder gets his pawn back and gets into an equal endgame. But so takes, and knight takes d7, the knight saves itself from capture here by knight takes, but another reason Fabiano probably went for this line is because, so this was all force, this was a force, every one of these past moves are captures, and now, remember how like c7 was an issue with this knight b5 idea? There's the same idea of knight g5. And if you're white, you're thinking this looks really, really good. Because you can think on this position if you're black, but how do you defend f7? How do you defend it? It looks like black is messed up. Like you can push the pawn, but if the knight comes to f7, regardless of whether it took a pawn or not, that's a fork. This is just a fork, and there's just looks to be no way to defend f7. This looks to be completely winning. However, black has a cool little piece of trickery of just moving the bishop. And so this position is interesting. If you play knight takes f7, black will play rook d to f8, rook d to f8. So this knight's hit, and this bishop is hit. So, okay, knight takes rook, take the bishop. So we move the d rook so that, because if we move the h rook, the knight would have ended up here and now could have escaped, right? But this knight's now boxed in. And so let's say you play rook e1, very natural move. Okay, f2's hanging, but this bishop's hanging. If the bishop moves away, this is like checkmate. So you gotta be careful. But king to d8. And now what do you do if you're white? I guess black's next couple moves are just here and takes. And white cannot bust out their knight that fast. So like rook e2, defends the f2 pawn or something, rook f8. Doubles here, hits the knight, but just bishop d6 shields that. And then after takes, okay, you have a rook and a pawn for a bishop and a knight. It's about equal in the endgame. So that's a very, very nice trick. So after bishop to e7, this is the end of Awonder's preparation. Or, I mean, of course, he had probably prepped some lines here. This is the end of Awonder's preparation. But Fabiano quickly plays this move, pawn to h4. And so this position is approximately equal if you find the correct move for black. So pawn to h4 is a nasty move because taking g5 looks very unappealing here. H takes g5, not only is this bishop much, much better than this knight because it's an open position and there's pawns on both sides of the board, so that favors long-range pieces, like this bishop here can be doing damage this way, it can be doing damage this way. Also, pressure on that h pawn that's going to be a target over the long term. So black here will suffer for a long time. So it makes it very unattractive to take this knight, but also you still have to defend this pawn if you're playing black, right? So if you play rook hf8, knight takes h7, the rook is hit, and then it can just come back, and white just snagged a pawn. If you play rook df8, it's playable, but it's very passive, and your rooks, you just kind of jam them in behind pawns, and I think white's rooks are doing much, much better here, even though like the game's approximately equal. Well, like the pawn structure is equal, but the rook activity is not. So here, I think black needs to come up with the very clever move of rook d to e8. Rook d to e8. So if black does nothing, to be clear, so knight takes f7, I think it's not the same, because in this position, I think like h5 and this pawn can help bust you out. Okay, so what's the difference here? Rook e1, king d8, rook d3. If we do the same exact things, this bishop's hit. So now if this bishop moves, there's these clever ideas of like check, and then you take this, and then this is like checkmate. So there's some trickery here if you do nothing. So the key move for black is rook d8. So this rook is still active. However, if you take this pawn, now there's rook hf8, and one of these pieces are going to fall. So the knight moves away, and you lose this bishop, right? So knight takes f7 is still impossible. And if you say like, even if you like defend this bishop, right? I think h6 is still playable here because you take it and rook hf8. Knight needs to move. I think there's only square. And then there's like takes f2. So I think like black is doing okay here in most cases with rook d to e8. Allowing knight takes f7 and just going for that activity and allowing these rooks to be free and to be active in this position. In the game though, knight takes f7 it's annoying to constantly deal with, and so it's understandable. But Awonder plays bishop takes knight, which I talked about for all these reasons of the bishop being better than the knight, and this pawn tying down these pawns, and so forming a target here. So Awonder now agrees to suffer for a long period of time to be able to eventually try to hold a draw by playing bishop takes knight. So he gave himself a very tough task for the game ahead against Fabiano Caruana, who's going to press endlessly and press, you know, as good as anybody in the world, maybe except for Magnus Carlsen, but certainly as good as anyone in the world. He's going to press endlessly. And yeah, but it's a tall order, and he fulfilled that tall order. So he plays first f6 to take that pawn to be able to just so basically the point is, when you take this pawn, you can now play h6. So this pawn defends the other one now, and then that rook is free. And so basically, we have this game where these pawns trade themselves off. It was just very good defense by Awonder. So now, I mean, his rooks are a little bit more free, but this pawn is you know, it's an extra pawn. But it's now hard to deal with. It's hard to defend because now there's all sorts of threats coming. He freed his pieces. He's not just staying tied down to the pawns. And so eventually, Fabi wasn't able to make enough progress with this g-pawn. So a lot of advancements over here. Awonder would be very happy to trade that knight for a bishop. Fabi had the option here, but and this knight is attacking 2 pawns. Rook to g7. So I guess the threat here was rook to h7 check to take this c7 pawn. Rook was attacking this pawn. King defends. So we trade some pawns over there. And this king now becomes more active and supports this knight to d4 coming into the game. And finally, so a lot of checks. Did not want to trade rooks. Did not want to trade rooks. So the rooks on the board is what's going to enable him to draw this game. Because bishop versus knight, the bishop is much better. And the king is going to have to either be way over. The king and the knight are going to be way over here on like this part of the board. And that's going to be a problem because they're both very slow pieces. So while white comes and takes this pawn and then races with this pawn, black's not going to be able to get back in time is going to be part of the issue. So, but the rook is a long range piece. And so he keeps that on the board. And check and 83. And at this point, I think Fabi was forced to play bishop takes knight. Because I think if you play king back, there's like this move knight f1, I believe, or knight c4. 1. Anyway, in the game there was takes. Oh wait, eventually there was takes. So okay, he didn't want to take that knight. He wanted to keep the bishop on the board, but eventually there was little choice. I think here, yeah, so this was the key moment. So if you play like rook g8 and keep advancing with these pawns, so Awonder's keeping his pieces very active, right? So now there's check and knight b3. Look at these pieces and all they're doing. This is going to be checkmate. This is going to be checkmate. You don't want to get franked like that. You don't want to get checkmate franked like that. So I think there was no defense in this position for our checkmate, actually. So bishop takes knight was forced. And from here, this position is quite drawn, and you see actually table base come up. But still, you need proper technique to draw this game. And Awonder hangs onto this pawn and scoops up the other one. And he just needs this king to be able to cross over. What Fabi wants to do is be able to take this pawn and then still cut this king off from crossing over against the e-file. But it was really not possible. And they traded, and Awonder defended this endgame all the way to the very end, 77 moves, in the Kholmov Gambit against the Petroff king himself, Fabiano Caruana, who pioneered the Petroff, but certainly didn't pioneer knight takes e4 on the third move of the game, thought to be a noob trap. And actually Hans Niemann said in his post-game interview that he was impressed with Awonder's creativity. That you need to be creative if you're stuck in school, I think, or along his words. And he said that the Kholmov Gambit was not bad. So I think this is a very interesting line to try. Of course, like white has the option of just kind of bailing out into a completely equal and dull endgame, but a lot of people are trying to hang on to that pawn and have issues. So let me know in the comments below if you would play the Kholmov Gambit. Also say hi to Awonder, a good friend of mine. And wish him good luck at the U.S. Championships. He's doing well. He's got 5 out of 9. Fabiano Caruana, of course. What can you say? What more can you say about him? He's in the lead. Not too surprising. But thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and like and subscribe. It means so much. And have a fantastic day.